Hi, my name is Paul Roberts, and I'm the cyber content lead here at ReversingLabs, and I'm here to welcome you to the first episode of a new podcast that we're doing called ConversingLabs. It features conversations about threats, threat detection, and cyber defense. Every 2 weeks, ConversingLabs will introduce you to the best minds in threat intelligence, malware reverse engineering, threat hunting, and software assurance. We'll take on the news of the day and unpack the latest threats and attacks to help give you critical insights that can help with your own risk assessments and cyber defense. This week, we're focusing on the war in Ukraine and taking a close look at some of the new malware that's appeared in Ukrainian cyberspace, both preceding and following Russia's invasion on February 24th. Our guest is Mislav Boros, who's a threat researcher here at ReversingLabs, and we're going to be talking about and analyzing Hermetic Wiper and ISAC Wiper, which are two Wiper malware variants that have been used to attack Ukraine. We're also going to talk about a third variant, Caddy Wiper, that's just been discovered in recent days. I'm going to just start out and introduce myself, and then I'm going to pass it to Mislav and let him introduce himself. My name is Paul Roberts, and I'm the cyber content lead here at ReversingLabs. I'm a longtime cybersecurity journalist, started a publication called The Security Ledger, and so been writing about cybersecurity and for about 20 years. And I'm really happy to be working here at ReversingLabs with some of the just top minds in cyber threat intelligence and research, and happy to be able to be here and kind of help along with conversations. Mislav, tell the folks about yourself.
So, hi, Paul. Thanks for the introduction. I'm very excited to be a part of this first episode. Hopefully, we'll give some insights and know-how that people will find interesting. So, my name is Misa Borosh. I'm a threat analyst here in ReversingLabs. I'm actually a part of the Titanium Core team. And Titanium Core, for those who don't know, is actually our static file analysis engine. And most of our other products are built on top of it. It's responsible for file identification, unpacking a lot of different file formats, metadata extraction, and behavior indicator extraction and file classification. I've been in information security for 10 years. I've been in the military. I've been a penetration tester, and for more than 3.5 years, I've been a threat analyst here in ReversingLabs.
Thanks so much. It's a really impressive resume. When we're talking about these Ukrainian Wiper malware variants, this is something that is really coming to a head right now with the conflict between Russia and Ukraine, Russia's invasion of Ukraine on February 24th. But this is not a new phenomena. In fact, the NotPetya malware, which circulated back in 2017, also began in Ukraine, looked initially like it was ransomware, but ended up really effectively being Wiper malware. So this is something that we're seeing more and more of. And Mislav, I think maybe just to start off, I thought I'd ask you to kind of talk about the difference, like what makes, for somebody like yourself, what determines whether something is a Wiper malware or just ransomware?
Well, the main difference between Wiper and ransomware is the goal of the attacker, because the threat actor behind ransomware wants to have some financial gain from the malware. He wants to encrypt your files, and he wants to be able to decrypt them if you pay him, because if other organizations that were hit by the same ransomware will hear that the malware operators do not successfully recover your files, they won't probably pay them. So they want to have a successful business model where they successfully encrypt your files, probably steal them, and threaten to publish them publicly, and they want to get paid. Now, on the other hand, the threat actors behind Wiper malware simply want to destroy data on your computer, have no financial gain, and basically it's just to disrupt services in a certain area or certain organization, industries, and similar.
Right. So, I mean, it's all about the outcome, right? And ransomware, there's an interest in preserving the integrity of the system that you infect, because that's what ultimately they're going to pay you to get access back to. Wipers, there's no such interest. They're really just destructive.
Yeah. Now, there are some ransomware malware families that we like to call Vipers, but these are just poorly implemented ransomware
It's just
families.
bad ransomware, right?
Yeah, it's just bad ransomware. So yeah, different kind of Viper.
So we know that the invasion of Ukraine began on February 24th. That's when the kinetic attack began. What's the timeline for the Wiper malware? So we had two variants that were identified in the sort of early days of the invasion. One was Hermetic Wiper, the other was ISAC Wiper, and we're gonna get into the details of both of those. But like, what's the timeline on those? Do we have any sense that these predated the kinetic attack, maybe existed for and were used for other purposes prior to it, or what do we know?
Well, we can go a few weeks back to January, where Ukraine suffered another Viper attack called Whispergate. And actually, this malware presented itself as ransomware, but quickly researchers saw that the data was practically unrecoverable because it would wipe the master boot record, which is actually the first sector on the disk where all the data about the logical partitions and basically shows where the operating system is located. So this is similar to the way NotPetya operated back in 2017. And it was kind of a foreshadowing of what was going to happen when the kinetic attack actually started. So Asset Research actually found the sample on, I think, February 23rd. And as soon as they published their research, we found the samples in our Titanium cloud, which we probably got into our network of malware sharing. So yeah, I can show you something interesting.
Sure.
So when talking about timeline, I'll share you a view from the A1000, which is our malware analysis platform. It basically has the static analysis results, dynamic analysis results, and combined with other threat intel data such as AV results and similar. So one of the samples had the encoded timestamp dated to 28th of December 2021. So if this wasn't tampered with, probably means that this was like compiled months ago and was probably stockpiled and was waiting to be used in something large scale such as this. This isn't really uncommon for probably an actor of this caliber, where they tend to stockpile, as we'll show later, certificates. They'll try to stockpile other malware. They try to stockpile access to networks and just try to use them all at once to maximize the damage done. Because after they use them, they effectively burned all of those.
So this was, for whatever threat actor was responsible for this. This was something that they had on the shelf, ready to go at least 2 months ahead of the actual attack. We can tell that by the timestamp. That's really interesting.
Yep.
One of the other interesting aspects about this Hermetic Wiper is, and part of the reason it's called Hermetic Wiper, is that the malware was actually signed with a valid extended validation certificate. So these are digital, PKI certificates that, with EV search, you're actually doing a lot more work up front to identify yourself and verify your identity to get the cert. And it was signed with one of these. Talk about that, Mislav. Like, why would they go through that trouble, and how common is it that you're seeing, malware, ransomware, wipers, whatever, signed with like EV certs?
Well, I'll show you another screen in our AV output. So this is what you were talking about.
Yeah.
So the malware is actually signed by a certificate that was issued to Hermetica Digital Ltd.
Yep.
Now, this is actually a company from Cyprus, a one-man company. And it was actually found that the person behind the company actually did no development work at all. He was basically a content creator for something, a writer, basically. So what we had here is actually a fraudulently issued certificate. So the threat actor behind the attack actually had to go through some social engineering, some human to get in contact and to really get this certificate issued. And just to expand on the timeline, this certificate is valid from April 13th. So this just goes where I was saying a bit earlier, that the threat actor of this caliber would stockpile all of these assets like certificates, different malware, access to different networks, and other.
So really, and you can see the issuing CA, certificate authority there is DigiCert, very highly respected CA, US-based CA. And so what you're saying is there was actually, even before the malware was created, there was this additional work that was going on to obtain this certificate. So this was a issued certificate, not simply one that was stolen. It was issued to the threat actors who were posing as this Hermetica Digital Ltd. Again, not a software publisher, so shouldn't need a code signing certificate, but one was issued to them as far back as April 2021. So that pushes the date back almost a year before the actual attack.
Yeah, using of stolen or forged certificate is nothing new. We've written several blog posts about it a few years back, but it all in all shows that this was a planned attack that involved forethought and execution well in advance of the deployment of the malware itself.
Right. And just to not to belabor the point, but to use that extended validation cert, that legitimately issued and vouched for certificate, that's going to make it much harder for endpoint detection or tools to assess that this is actually malicious code as opposed to legitimate code if it's signed by a CA that's vouching for the code, right?
Well, not to get into specific names, but some tools are short-circuited when the file is successfully signed with a valid certificate.
Yeah.
So yeah.
This is all about avoiding detection, obviously.
Yeah.
So one of the other interesting things that I know we talked about this and that you brought up was that when you look deep into Hermetic Wiper, one of the other things you found was that it was reusing actually some commercial dispartitioning components, libraries that are not in and of themselves malicious. Can you talk about that, and how often do you see that with either wiper malware or ransomware, that they're leveraging a legitimate partitioning tool to do their dirty work?
Yep, sure. So basically, this became a bit fishy when we saw that the original sample, if you look at the extracted files, has, besides this icon, generic, and PNG resources, which are pretty common, 4 Microsoft compressed resources. And luckily, these are automatically decompressed and unpacked with Titanium Core. And we could see that these were actually PSys files, which are actually device drivers. So the malware itself comes with 4 different drivers, which are actually also signed, which are actually easy use partition master, which is actually a free partition software used for partitioning the hard drive and reorganizing this space like any other partitioning tool.
Right.
Like we can see that it's a bit older software, and I think the attackers didn't completely trust the software. We'll talk a little bit later about that.
Yeah, it's got a 2012 date or 2014. Yeah, 2012, right?
Yeah, and you mentioned usage of legitimate tools. So yeah, this is a legitimate tool. It's by itself, it's not malicious, and it's not uncommon for malware to use third-party libraries to leverage their functionalities for their own gain, but it's not that common. I haven't seen it in Vipers to use partition software in such a way.
What do you think's behind that, Mislav? Why use this legitimate partitioning component? What was the advantage they were getting by that? Was it just about speed, kind of time to complete the malware itself, or was there something else going on?
So they actually did a very thorough job to wipe the disk. Like, you can override the master boot record we talked about, but to write over any to write in deeper over any other sectors like the MFT of the NTFS, that's the master file table, you would need some workarounds or some custom code, but they used drivers just for that. So just to expand the drivers a bit, like we've seen 4 different drivers. So the malware, before installing these drivers, has to actually decide which drivers to install. So it queries some system information and decides, depending on if the system is 32-bit, which version of the operating system is running, which driver to install. And to install the driver, it has to get the SE loaded driver privilege, which we also immediately saw in our static behavior indicators. It's here at the top. So even before dynamically analyzing the samples, we already knew that it was going to install these drivers. But what threw us off at first a little bit was that they were legitimate drivers. So there weren't any malicious code that was actually part of them.
So in theory, that might throw, from a threat detection standpoint or analysis detection, would that make it harder to know that this was a malicious versus a legitimate program? Or,
well, it gives like a heads up to what the malware may actually do, but it still doesn't paint the whole picture.
Right.
So.
So I think one thing to keep in mind is Hermetic Wiper was actually just one component of this wiper attack on these organizations within Ukraine, and that there were other companion malware that went along with it. And there have been 2 that have been identified. One was the Hermetic Wizard, and then there was another kind of almost like decoy program called Hermetic Ransom. Can you tell us what we know about those?
Yep. So it was initially reported that the Hermetic Wiper was pushed through global policy updates, which means that the attackers had access to systems and to organizations' networks, but it was also spread using the Hermetic Wizard, which is actually a worm that contains 3 different DLLs. 2 are spreader components, and 1 is the Hermetic Wiper itself. And it's also signed by the Hermetica digital signature, and it's got its name through the exported name. It's called wizard.dll. So what the Hermetic Wizard actually does is it just enumerates all the available network resources and tries to connect to different ports of the available resources through FTP, SSH, HTTP, or other, and simply copies the payload, which is the worm itself, to another computer, and then runs the Wiper malware. Now,
so this is a pretty typical kind of worm behavior.
Yep. Just like we've seen in Petya, but not Petya had the luck that it leveraged the Eternal Blue exploit, which in enterprise environments which didn't keep up with the patches were mostly vulnerable, which led to the widespread of not Petya malware.
That's right. So we saw the same stuff. If I recall, we saw the same mix of, so you mentioned the group policy and kind of leveraging like Active Directory compromises to spread the malware, and then also this worm component, which is looking to exploit like open ports or vulnerabilities or whatever. Like we saw that actually with NotPetya as well, if I recall, also like that dual approach. I mean, obviously you're looking to spread as quickly as you can and using as many different strategies to do that as you can.
Yeah, NotPetya also used the PSExec with the dumped hashes alongside with the Eternal Blue, so that maximized it.
Right. So the difference is that Eternal Blue exploit highly effective, and it was Windows based, so just a lot of vulnerable systems out there that hadn't patched at the time.
Yeah, I was in pen testing at the time, and it was actually our bread and butter for a year.
Yep. Full Employment Act for pen testers.
Yep.
Yeah. And for that hermetic ransom piece, what do we know about that thing?
Yeah, it was also called party ticket.
Party ticket,
was,
yes, right.
Yeah, by some researchers, it was actually a ransomware written in Go, and basically it was just a decoy just to throw people off, while the Hermetic Viper did its job in the background.
Kind of creating a distraction for security teams, what have you. They're responding to the wrong.
Yeah, I mean, ransomware is so widespread today, so they would probably think that it's just another ransomware attack. So they would probably throw some alerts off and write it off like being a part of that, like we resolved the threat, and actually the real threat was still present on the system.
So let me just message to the attendees. We are going to be taking questions and answers shortly, and so you can use the Q&A feature on Zoom webinar. And if you've got a question for Mislav around either Hermetic Wiper, ISAC Wiper, or other questions, feel free to ask them, and we'll take those questions very shortly. So just want to make you aware of that. Can we talk about the ISAC Wiper threat that also was identified subsequent to Hermetic Wiper?
Okay, yeah, sure. So a day afterward, ISAC Wiper was discovered, and it was discovered on it wasn't deployed on the same networks as Hermetic Viper, which probably tells us that the actors behind the ISAC Viper were in some sort of coordination with the actors behind the Hermetic Viper. So what's interesting is that it's much less sophisticated than the Hermetic Viper, and its initial name was due to the pseudo number generator it used to corrupt files. It eventually turned out that it wasn't the ISAC pseudo random number generator, but the name stayed. So unlike the Hermetic Viper, the ISAC Viper.
So it was using this random number generator to just throw junk data into files.
Yeah, at the beginning of the files, at the beginning of the master boot record, and so on. So unlike the Hermetic Viper, it was not digitally signed. So they didn't use. So either this was used by another threat actor, or they didn't have another certificate available. Probably, I mean, they could use the same certificate because the time frame was practically a day apart. So what's interesting about the ISAC Wiper is the presence, and what really shows the lack of sophistication is the presence of the debug strings. Like the malware was pretty easy to analyze because it had all these strings, like when it enumerated logical drives, it would print them to a file. When it started erasing logical drives, it would print that to a file. So it was really easy to pinpoint which function does what, and to create a detection rule really quickly for it. So this is like, this random prints are something we who are not like full-time developers are all guilty of, just putting random prints at random places of the code just to see where the bug actually is. Now, this tells us that probably the malware didn't work as intended initially. So they probably didn't corrupt all hard drives. They wanted to see if the enumeration is going right. And what's also notable is that it's corrupting in a single thread. So this probably means it's very slow.
Right. So this is malware that they deployed really before it was working reliably.
Yep. Yeah, actually, yes. Yep. So it probably means that they like probably mobilized all the assets they had from probably different threat actors and just try to get everything out there and throw everything at once, and that's it.
So for organizations or for folks who are on the line who, are concerned about these types of threats in their own environment. And again, as people have pointed out, these are not gated threats in any way. They're not checking for Ukrainian language, keyboards or IP addresses. So these are threats that could easily spread beyond Ukraine. So if they're worried about these or other similar types of threats, wiper threats, any suggestions or tips for how they can improve their threat detection, improve their threat hunting, kind of use some of the information that you've presented here to help them?
Well, what's really scary is that it looks like the attackers had initial access to the compromised systems. So if you would have something which is, something like a phishing email, which is of low complexity, you know where to look for it. But these were probably specifically, each organization that was targeted was probably targeted in a no unique way, where the manual attackers probably did recon, found out where the entry points were when establishing foothold, did some lateral movement to enable to get to the domain controller, which basically means the access to the whole enterprise network.
Yep.
So there's no simple way to answer how to protect from it. Like, we can suggest endpoint protection and deploying different detection rules, but you really have to work
privilege, right?
You really have to work from the ground. You really have to work from the ground up and do everything that makes lateral movement harder. Stuff like not using labs, not using admin passwords, not using domain admin accounts to log into different machines other than the domain controller, and just stuff like that. So good security practices in combinations with some good security solutions, and just to have the oversight of what's happening on your network, so you have the time to respond.
We're going to take questions in a second, so if you've got them, use the Q&A feature. So Mislav, in the last couple days, ESET and others have identified yet another wiper, this one called Caddy Wiper, also circulating on systems and networks in Ukraine. Has ReversingLabs had a chance to take a look at that?
Well, yeah, we already wrote a Yara detection rule for it. Yep. as soon as it was available. So it doesn't, I think it came in on Monday, and it had no code level similarities to Hermetic Wiper or ISAC Wiper. It was not digitally signed. It does destroy the user data and goes through all the disk partitions and overwriting them. And it has one interesting feature that actually tells us that it's targeting the enterprise environments, is that it checks if it's being run on a domain controller. This is probably due to the attackers don't want to destroy the whole domain and keep the access to the system for possible future attacks. So
really interesting. And we'll share actually the link. So you mentioned ReversingLabs publishes Yara rules for a lot of different threats, and we've got them for ISAC Wiper, Hermetic Wiper, and Caddy Wiper. We've released those in the last couple of weeks, so we'll share that link on the chat as well, so that folks can hold on for everyone, not just for the panel.
So we tend to respond to these threats as quickly as we can and share them for everyone, so everyone is free to download them on our public GitHub repo.
If just in case people don't know, what can they do with these Yara rules? How can they operationalize them?
Well, we tend to write these Yara rules to be classification Yara rules, not threat hunting rules, but you can use them with regular Yara executable just to search for the files on your system.
All right. Hey, Carolyn, do we have any questions for Mislav?
We do have a few questions. Hi, everybody. My name is Carol, and I'm a cyber content creator here at Reversing Labs. So let's get started with some questions.
Great.
So first question for you, Mislav. Have you only seen these wipers in Ukraine, or have you seen samples of them discovered in other countries?
Well, actually, they came to prominence in Ukraine, and especially in the last few months, but there were some Viper reports being used in Iran, being used in Saudi Arabia, being used by North Korea, like even in the Sony attack a few years back. So, but they really came to prominence with NotPetya and in the recent few months.
Next question for you. One that hopefully you can answer. What was the language or languages the attacker used to write these wipers? And is there any pattern there?
Well, there isn't any special pattern. There are no apparent similarities between all these Vipers, but they did write the hermetic ransom in Go. So that was they probably need to do it quickly, something to throw people off. So they probably used Go for that.
Next question. What Linux malware are you seeing being exploited in the wild against Ukraine?
Well, we haven't seen anything of what would be as widespread as these Vipers. Most probably due to the fact that these attack enterprise networks, which are all on Windows ADs. So mostly these are the ones that we analyze.
Okay, and then we have one last question for right now. Did Caddy Wiper target Russian keyboards at all?
I believe not. None of these Vipers were actually had switches like this, that they would ignore certain keyboards or certain areas like Paul mentioned IPs or anything similar.
So, I mean, what should we know about? There's been a lot written about these just because of their connection with Ukraine. I mean, is your sense, Mislav, that these were pretty widespread within the country, and that these are now they're out there and they're going to kind of be with us for a while, or are they getting a lot of attention because of the context, but compared to other threats that are out there now, Conti or whatever, not such a big concern for organizations that aren't actually in the war zone?
Well, they definitely show the effect of the malware, that it can have really a widespread effect. So basically, I think the context has a lot to do with it, and this is probably not the end of it. I'm not sure if if there would be any sense for the same attackers to attack someone outside the Ukraine currently, but I don't know. We will see.
And I know one of the interesting points that you've made to me before is you can really see the effort and planning that went into Hermetic Wiper, that, for the groups, whether they're nation state groups, cyber criminal groups, terrorist groups, whatever, if they're using this, if they want to, they're going to put a lot of time and effort into creating this malware and equipping it, like with the extended validation cert. Might take months of planning, but the payoff for them is very high effectiveness. But they're not going to just burn that type of a threat on a low value target, or they're going to save those for very special operations.
Well, yeah, most definitely. They really want to spread the effect of the malware as much as they can. So right. What we've seen actually, like the Caddy Wiper came 2 or 3 weeks after. So I don't know if they needed to have some more time to develop another wave of the attack. They didn't count on that another wave should be necessary. So we'll probably see more of those while this conflict continues. Probably not as advanced as Hermetic Wiper, but certainly they have some more in their sleeves.
We do have some more questions.
Okay, go ahead.
You want me to shoot them your way?
Yep.
So were any of the Hermetic, ISAC, Caddy samples found in TiCloud prior to the start of the war? And if so, were they detected as malicious prior to the ESET research being published?
So no, we didn't have any samples in the cloud before, but we did manage to capture some parts of the hermetic bunch, like with our ML model. We caught the ransomware, but with our ransomware model, and we did actually caught the hermetic wizard with our experimental ML model as well. So theoretically, if they were in cloud before, we would have classified them, but they weren't.
Okay, cool. Another question for you. Did you notice any similarities from the BDP paths and code similarities with other threat actors?
So no, we cannot still do any attribution. From these attacks, we just have circumstantial evidence that point to Russia, and that's mostly it.
Okay, so that's all we have for now. If anybody has any more questions, please use the Q&A function. But for right now, I think we're good.
Again, for most organizations, right, attribution is a little bit secondary, right? Like you're focused on defense and detection, and that in some ways is independent of who's behind the threat. Although obviously it is really important to know, and there are bigger implications behind these. So really good questions from everybody. Thank you so much. And this will be recorded. This is being recorded, and will be available for viewing after the fact. We'll send you a link when it's up on our website. So before we go, we actually have, for all of you who, thank you for joining us for our first ever Conversing Labs episode. And we have a t-shirt giveaway. We've got a certain number of t-shirts to give away. And to kind of qualify for a t-shirt, we're going to give you a little 3-question poll. And I think I can probably do this. This is the first question. And for everybody who answers the 3 questions right, you will get a t-shirt, and we'll follow up with you to get the mailing address. This is North America only, I'm afraid. So if you're attending from somewhere else in the world, we'll get some other gift out to you, but t-shirts are a North American thing. And the correct answer for those of you who took it, obviously, was question answer number 4, ISAC. Discovered it, the Hermetic Wiper initially, and ISAC Wiper as well. Okay. Second question here. The name Hermetic Wiper comes from what? Does it come from the malware's secret hermit-like qualities, the malware's superior construction, Hermetica Digital, the company the malware claimed to belong to? Ending that poll. Okay, 91% got the right answer, which was Hermetica Digital, the company malware claimed belonged to, is a Cypriot one-person company, not involved in software development. But thank you to those 3 people who fell for the hermit-like qualities. That was good. Makes me feel good. Okay. Final question. This is for all the marbles. This is for the t-shirt. Wiper malware generally. This is Wiper malware generally, not Hermetic Wiper, but Wiper malware generally has only been observed in the wild in Ukraine, has been observed in the wild in other countries besides Ukraine, or is incredibly common and has been observed in the wild everywhere. Okay, I'm going to end the poll. Okay, split pretty evenly. I think the correct answer is has been observed in the wild in other countries besides Ukraine, but is not incredibly common. And certainly it's not the case that it's only ever been observed in Ukraine. Mislav, would you back me up on that?
Well, you could actually, I would take both of the answers as correct. So
you'd take 2 or 3.
Yeah,
all right.
It's a gray area.
Okay. Well, it's a gray area, right? What does it mean to be incredibly common, right? I guess that's kind of where the gray area is. So we'll give you credit if you had 2 or 3. I think my point in the question was kind of like Wiper malware isn't just limited to Ukraine, and yet it's not as common just as run-of-the-mill ransomware. It's been observed in more selective settings, but not just in Ukraine. But yes, if you did 2 or 3, we'll give you credit for that. And we will reach out to you and get your contact information so that we can send you a Conversing Labs t-shirt or some other more mailable premium if you're outside of the United States. Okay, that's our conversation for today. Thank you all so much. This is going to be Conversing Labs, going to be a regular series. We're going to be coming to you every couple of weeks with another conversation about threats, threat detection, secure software development and software supply chain issues as well. So, and we're going to be talking to Mislav and some of the other great researchers here at ReversingLabs and at other organizations. So thanks so much for joining us. And we hope to see you back here at our next episode. And Carolyn, thanks for all your help managing the audience. And we'll do this again. Mislav, that was a great presentation. Thank you so much for sharing your time with us. I hope you enjoyed the discussion. And if you like what you hear, do us a favor and give us a thumbs up on your favorite podcast platform. Thanks, and I hope you enjoy the show.